The 14th and 15th centuries saw enormous changes, political, social, intellectual, across all of Europe. Most of these were long-lasting, especially so for some individual states. The kingdoms of Europe, and especially those in the west and around the Mediterranean basin, shifted their governance from a medieval administration built upon the rigidity of their respective feudal systems to something more standardized, more professional. Over the next few centuries, from the 15th through the 17th, these new monarchies, such as the one in Spain, would emerge stronger than their previous iterations. While the kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, and the various kingdoms in Spain were not major players in the Hundred Years' War, they were not untouched by that conflict. Portugal and these kingdoms in Spain, in particular the Kingdom of Castile, which by the 14th century was the largest of Spain's kingdoms, had long been political and economic rivals. The two countries often supported competing factions across Europe as well. During the Hundred Years' War, Portugal supported England, while Castile supported France. In part to buttress their political and military alliances, the English sought an alliance with Portugal in order to counteract the alliance between Castile and France. In 1387, Philippa of Lancaster married King João of Portugal. Philippa was the granddaughter of King Edward III. In 1399, her younger brother Henry would become the King of England. The marriage between Philippa and João had been partly prompted by a 1386 treaty between England and Portugal, which came to be known as the Portuguese-British Alliance, and it would last tenuously through World War II. Philippa had an unusual upbringing. She'd been partly raised by a wonderful governess named Catherine, who was also her father's mistress and who would eventually become her stepmother. Catherine ensured that Philippa had an unusual, and at this time this means a typically male, education. Philippa studied poetry under both Jean Froissart, who is best known as an historian who documented the history of the first half of the Hundred Years' War, and Geoffrey Chaucer. Philippa's governess Catherine just happened to be Chaucer's sister-in-law. She also studied biblical history and theology under John Wycliffe, whose followers, the Lollards, were later prosecuted as heretics. Philippa was a political force in both the Portuguese and English courts. For instance, she supported her brother Henry's usurpation of the English throne in 1399. He usurped their older brother Richard II, and she helped arrange political marriages between Portuguese and English nobles. She and her husband would have 9 children, of which 6 survived to adulthood. She's known as the mother of Portugal's illustrious generation, as her surviving children were, quite simply, awesome. Her third surviving son, Henry, was known as the Navigator. He's the one who helped spark the European Age of Discovery. Her oldest surviving daughter, Isabella, married Philip the Good, the Duke of Burgundy. More on them in a later lesson. Her fourth surviving son, John, would have his own famous descendants, most notably Queen Isabella of Castile. In 1469, Philippa's great-granddaughter, Queen Isabella of Castile, married King Ferdinand of Aragon, uniting the two Christian kingdoms of Spain. As they consolidated their power, they also moved against the Muslims, who still occupied far southern Spain in Granada, continuing the Reconquista which had begun centuries before. In January of 1492, the Spanish monarchs triumphantly rode into the Alhambra, the former palace of the Muslim king of Granada, which was now under Spanish control. Isabella and Ferdinand, who sought to consolidate their control over all of Spain, tried to assert that control religiously. 3 months after their victory in Granada, they issued the Alhambra Decree, which announced that all Jews unwilling to convert to Catholicism were to be expelled from Spain by the end of July. Wait a minute. The Spanish had just defeated the Muslims. Why this sudden focus on the Jews? Hadn't Jews, Christians, and Muslims coexisted peacefully in Al-Andalus during the Middle Ages? Yes, they had, but that was now hundreds of years in the past. As Christians had reconquered parts of Al-Andalus, Christian monarchs in Spain began to view Spanish Jews with suspicion, likely because many Jewish families had commercial and familial connections all across Europe, and so their loyalty was considered suspect. Beginning back in 1391, Jews in Spain had been subject to severe persecution. It's estimated that as many as 200,000 Jews converted to Christianity between the 1390s and July of 1492. In Spain, among conservative and wealthy Christian circles, there had always been concern that Jewish converts, called conversos, hadn't really converted. In 1478, before the Alhambra Decree was even an idea, Ferdinand and Isabella had been disturbed to hear reports from their advisors that most Jewish converts had only pretended to convert to Christianity. These crypto-Jews continued their Jewish faith in secret, or so it was alleged. That same year, Ferdinand asked Rome for permission to begin an inquisition, infamously to be known as the Spanish Inquisition, so as to investigate these claims of non-conversion. While the papal court gave its approval, the Catholic leadership in Rome had little to do with the Spanish Inquisition itself. It was Isabella and Ferdinand, who'd eventually be called Los Reyes Católicos, the Catholic monarchs, who established the Inquisition in 1480 as a civil institution with religious overtones. It was they who handed over the reins of the operation to religious zealots within the Spanish clergy, who acted as primarily officers of the civil, not religious, state. That designation as civil authorities gave the investigators of this institution, the inquisitors, permission to a whole range of punishments, such as torture and execution, that the strictly pro-life church hierarchy was officially against. The Spanish Inquisition would continue, with some changes in mission over time, into the early 19th century. The fallout from the foundation of the Spanish Inquisition and the subsequent Alhambra Decree were interesting. It's estimated that the Jewish population in Spain numbered below 100,000 in 1492. Of those, perhaps as many as 50,000 chose to convert to Christianity rather than be expelled and lose their land and businesses. It's estimated that a further 20 to 40,000 Jews left Spain altogether. Most fled to Jewish communities in North Africa, or maybe even Portugal, but many also fled to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Sultan at the time, Bayezid II, even sent the Ottoman Navy to collect all interested Jews, and he welcomed them into the Ottoman Empire and resettled them in Jewish communities in Thessaloniki in Greece and in Izmir in Turkey. Some of these exiled Spanish Jews, maybe as many as 10,000, eventually returned to Spain in the later 1490s and converted. To accommodate those who returned and those who'd converted, and perhaps to encourage more Jewish families to return, the Spanish government in 1493 issued a proclamation that set harsh sanctions against those who slandered or discriminated against these new Christians. So, we can see that one way in which the new monarchies sought to consolidate their power was through adherence to a strict religious homogeneity. In Spain's case, that was Catholic Christianity. As you can imagine, once the Protestant Reformation kicks off in the early 16th century, more kingdoms will be concerned with enforcing religious adherence to a state religion. But that's a story for another day.